Go ahead and add another layer, and we'll just call this cross-hatching or shading, texturing, any of the things you might think about when doing this. Okay, so there's not a whole lot in the scene. I kept this pretty light because there was going to be so much fill-in and various line work with the computer equipment. But there are some areas. So you can see I used some tapered lines on the top of the screen, on the face of the screen. And here it's really the same thing, but I'm just going to cross-hatch these. So I'm going to hold R, rotate the canvas to where it feels the most comfortable for me to do these. And I'm just going to do some thicker lines. Usually takes me a little bit to warm up here, so you can always kind of practice off to the side. Get the kind of look to the lines that you're thinking about. Feel out whether or not these are lines that you have to feather, which that's what I'm doing here. I'm actually passing over each one of these a few times. Now, they don't all have to be the same, but I do want that tapered kind of look because I feel like it will help me to differentiate from the other lines in this design that are more straight and less tapered. So again, it's all about creating as many variations as you can, not so much where it becomes distracting, but enough where you have some range in what you can render, and then ultimately what you can kind of convey with your line work. So now I've got all those pretty evenly spaced out. There's a little bit of them kind of bulking up down here. And then now I'm just going to cross hatch roughly at, I don't know if you'd call that a 45 degree, but just a slight angle. And then the same thing, I could start to vary these out a bit more. You see the diamond pattern gets wider. Yeah, I think I like that. So let me double click here and kind of look at it real quick from a distance. So it's just giving me a variation and a gradient. The other thing I tend to do is if I don't like, I kind of wish that would have been a little bit more condensed. So play around with the way in which you tighten up your line work. I think that if these were tighter together, this would have made a nicer gradient. It doesn't quite do the job. So let me do that. Let me go ahead and, well, first let me show you another way you might do it. You could also rotate this and you could just introduce another series of lines. Check it from a distance and you see that just darkened it down. So I think it's important to play around with those concepts, like not necessarily just always be in the habit of redoing everything. I'll be honest, even like that right there, I don't mind that. I just think it could be a little bit better. So let's try to do one quick variation of that. Now, because we're working digitally, we could also do this on a separate layer altogether and save it and then bring it in that way. But what I want to do here, I want to keep the same kind of tapered effect, but I want these to be much tighter together. So I'm paying attention to the gap in between the tapered lines. You see I got a pretty heavy one right there, about 3 of those back, but I'm not too worried about that. But as I start to separate these, see I'm kind of fighting the urge to separate these as much early on like I did the other set that I just inked or whatever. But as I bring these out, I'm going to make sure they stay. This is probably as wide as I'm going to allow these to get from one another. Pulling a little bit tighter here. Now the other thing to think about is I could keep these the same distance, but I could just make thinner lines. So I'm going to try that. So again, these are roughly the same distance apart, but I'm going a lot thinner with the line now, which obviously is going to give a different variation, a different effect from the way I started this. So something like that. And let's check that before we add the cross hatching. See, I already like that better. It reads differently. It just has more of a gradient type feel already, even without the cross hatching. So let me rotate this. And again, start very tight. Kind of pay attention to the diamond pattern that you're getting, the overlap. and then start to separate it because we do want a little bit of a gradient kind of effect. But again, I'm not going to separate them too far like before. In fact, this will probably be the max amount that I separate it. And then I'm just going to throw in these last few with a quick pass, so a less weighted kind of line. Like that. And I can go back and touch these up if I need to. Double click here, check it from a distance. And yeah, I definitely like that better than the first attempt. So if we get rid of that line work, you can see it has a pretty decent gradient to it. It's a pretty good shadow there. There's other things we could do. We could come back with the negative brush and we could draw back the other way. And so we could really control if we wanted there to be a little bit more light source. And what's neat about doing this, you can do all these little adjustments to that one layer and then merge it together, which is exactly what I think I'm going to do. So now that I've got that in place, I can simply merge it into this previous layer. But let's go ahead and finish cross-hatching any other areas before we do that. So let's try this little area right here and put the line work back in place. So again, start very tight with the lines and then have those fan out. You see I'm not worrying about those being tapered. I'm just worrying more about the gradient that they provide. Just like that. Maybe some from back here. And this is another way to propel things forward in the scene, because the more I shade, just like adding shadows, the more I shade behind something, like for instance, I could add some very light kind of lines right here. Then it's going to propel the other information forward. Now the wires, I think, get a little bit lost, but it makes that screen stand out more. Especially too if the line work is different from here to here. It shows that it's two different surfaces and therefore allows it to kind of read independently. So let's go ahead and wrap up right here. We'll head over to the next lesson and continue to add in some more shading.